Needed to find a way to get in front of them. And the way I did that was I found the email addresses of every HR person that worked at the NFL, and I sent them my resume every Monday morning, 9:30 a.m. for 7 straight weeks.
Peter Saddington, your big game hunter. And guys, we have our sights on someone special today.
Only a mother could invest in this idea.
Made this like super artistic.
That is actually absolutely correct. And that's a very, very astute assessment, actually.
True startup story, guys. You got it. Your company just got seed round financed. Congratulations. You're going to the moon. But now you have to scale. You found great talent out in California, New York, Georgia, and even Eastern Europe. So what communications platform will you be using to ensure your international team is always aligned? Well, the answer is easy. Slack.com for Teams. We've used Slack for all of our previous startups, and they've supported us in tremendous ways. And we want to give them a thanks today for supporting vchunting.com. Did you also know that Slack is a great tool for personal use? Yeah, I use my own personal Slack channel to drop in documents, notes, to-dos, and follow-ups to ensure that my workflow throughout the day is right on course. I promise you, if you try out slack.com for personal use, you'll end up using it for your team as well. Go to slack.com to check it out. Welcome everybody to another episode, season 3 of VC Hunting with me, Peter Saddington. You guys know that we're always on the hunt for great stories of venture capitalists. And today I have a great guest, Jay Kapoor, who is a principal at Launch Capital and the host of a new podcast, The Game Plan. Jay, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Peter. It's a pleasure to be on with you, and excited to chat with you about both my work as a VC investor and also the new podcast.
Absolutely. Well, let's just begin a little bit with some history. So you were previously at Madison Square Garden's Cap Venture, Techstars, and a slew of others. Tell us, what got you into venture capital?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a circuitous path about how I got here. I think, there's some folks that come right out of college and know they want to do venture capital. I think I'd always been excited by technology and innovation, given that I went to Carnegie Mellon for my undergrad, was around a lot of great new innovation that was happening on campus. I mean, I remember years before the Uber self-driving car, they were actually testing that in the robotics lab in 2009, back when I was on campus. And so it was really interesting to see that, innovation happening on campus, but never really saw it as part of my career path initially, just more of a, sort of academic interest in my classes and things like that. But as I sort of, went into Wall Street, like I think most people that don't know what they want to do right out of a finance major end up somewhere on Wall Street. And so I was very fortunate to cover something that I was excited about. So I was covering media and entertainment, worked on names like Warner Music, William Morris and Endeavor back, in 2011, 2012, was looking at those deals, and then covered a deal for a company called NEP Broadcasting in the sports space. And had always been a big sports fan, but never, again, really seen it as a viable opportunity, right? You just think of, it's a thing that you think other people do until you really get a chance to do it. And I've shared this story before, but I found a role at the NFL, and they were hiring for a financial analyst, and I didn't know what a financial analyst at the NFL really did. But I knew that I wanted to work there. And so I, sent my resume in, didn't hear back. And, I sort of realized that they hired out of 2 schools primarily. Carnegie Mellon wasn't one of them. Hired out of 2 banks primarily. UBS wasn't one of them. So I needed to find a way to get in front of them. And the way I did that was I found the email addresses of every HR person that worked at the NFL. Wow. And I sent them my resume every Monday morning, 9:30 a.m. for 7 straight weeks. And the 7th week, I finally got an SVP who wrote back. He was like, Jay, every single person in my department has your resume. We will call you back. Sure enough, a week later, I had an interview, and about a month later, I had the job. And so whenever like a young alum reaches out to me and they're like, oh, how do I break into sports, or how do I break into venture capital? Actually, my answer is very similar. If you want it, you go after it.
Go
right?
get it.
And that persistence is a measure of how much you want it. And it's almost tying back to my days at Carnegie Mellon. There's a professor, Randy Pausch, who wrote a really popular book called The Last Lecture before he passed away.
That's right.
And he had this great quote where he said, the brick walls are there to keep the people out that don't want it enough. And so, talking about breaking into whether it's sports or venture capital, If you want it bad enough, and those brick walls are really not an obstacle for you. And so that I think persistence has really carried with me through most of my career. Spent 3 amazing seasons at the NFL, got to work on some really great projects around media, around international consumer products, fan experience I got super involved in. And as I was getting involved in these different projects, it was a great time to be in New York. I've been in New York, all of my career. Some great sports and technology companies that are coming up. I tried bringing them into the NFL. It wasn't really the right combination, right? The NFL sort of has a very different focus. They're not really interested in early stage startups. And so I said, I need to go pursue something that is a little bit aligned with what I want to be doing. Left to help start the sports practice at a small firm called Mesa. We later got acquired. I stuck around post-acquisition for a bit, but again, like working at a big investment bank, which is who acquired us, wasn't exactly what I wanted to be doing. And since then, I've been on the early stage venture side. And so basically right after my acquisition lockup period was done, I connected with the folks at Techstars. They said, hey, we need somebody to come and work with our portfolio companies and help us source some new ones. And I said, great, I want to get plugged into the early stage venture ecosystem. It ended up being a really great marriage. And still, so grateful to those folks, still good friends with all my old colleagues at Techstars for just really showing me the ropes on what early stage venture is, what it means to be founder focused, really what it means to spend time in the trenches with these operators and just gain a tremendous amount of empathy for them. And then so I did Techstars for a little bit, was at Madison Square Garden, helped launch their early stage, it's a corporate venture practice, which in the long term turned out to be not something that they strategically wanted to pursue. And so since then, I've been at Launch Capital about 2 years now, working on early stage ventures. So Launch Capital, just at a high level, seed stage fund, we invest, about 8 to 10 million a year. We will lead or, co-invest, play pretty nice in the sandbox. And really the value that we bring in is that we've got a ton of great folks at Launch Capital that have both started companies, that have been investors for many years. We've got a tremendous network, both across the companies that we've invested in, and then even companies that we haven't invested in tend to speak pretty well of us and our team. And so, whenever we meet founders, we're really always happy to start plugging in with them and helping make introductions and really working closely with them on hiring. I spend a ton of time around capital raising with our companies. So even if, we don't, even through the diligence process, I find myself helping these companies in whatever their next goal is. And I think that's sort of been the DNA of Launch Capital, where we've just been seen as these investors that founders really trust and want to lean on. And so that's, reflected in the 11-year history of Launch. And it's exciting to see, where it's going to go from here.
Wow, that's really, really an awesome story, Jay. And there's a lot that I'd love to unpack here. But first and foremost, I really love the story of persistence. We syndicate globally. We have a lot of founders, what I like to call the entrepreneur curious, the young ones who are really interested in getting into this game. And it was really encouraging to hear your story of getting into the NFL and just being persistent, sending that email every Monday. Just do it. Send it. Eventually, you just it's like, I always like to talk to young founders and say, hey, a lot of startups is you just got to be like a woodcutter. You just got to keep chopping away. Yeah. Eventually, something's going to fall, and you'll have to respond appropriately. And hopefully, you've earned your I like to say calluses to be able to respond appropriately when the tree falls. But in many ways, you just got to keep knocking it out. Is that something that was is that something that is natural to you, or is that something that was kind of part of your upbringing?
It's interesting to think about it from an upbringing standpoint. I think when you look at the immigrant story, which, my family came to this country when I was 10 years old, was born in India, lived sort of many places, including the Middle East for a while. And then coming here, I think it's part of your immigrant DNA. And I've seen this with a lot of my, friends and close relations that are also part of that immigrant story. Look, I really think it becomes about your worldview, right? And my worldview is they can say yes, they can say no, but they can't ignore me. And that's again, like, at the end of the day, if you just carry that worldview, then the no's don't hurt as much, right? Then you're like, hey, I don't care about rejection because I put myself out there. If you didn't put yourself out there, they're gonna know anyway, right? No, like, you can't just sit here and wait for people to come bring opportunities to your inbox. It just doesn't happen. There's too much, there's too much going on. And so I think that it's really, maybe it's an immigrant worldview, and maybe it's just a worldview that I've developed through my experiences. But yeah, they can say yes, they can say no, but what they won't do is ignore me.
I love that. They at the end of the day, they can't. Now, they can say yes and no, but you've got their attention. You've got their attention.
Yeah.
If you're persistent enough, generally there's someone that's like intrigued just enough to give you enough playtime, and hopefully you'll be able to execute on that appropriately.
Yeah, that's right.
So when it comes to sports, like, we do a lot of digging here at VC Hunting, and I'll tell you, man, like, you are a huge sports fan. Back in November 11th of 2012, so we're going 8 years.
Wow, that's a way back.
You said this. You said, quote, "Looking out my window, I don't even think a fall from this height will do more damage than the Giants just did to me. Need more booze." So have you always been a sports fan? What's up with that?
Yeah, man, I should have scrubbed that one from my Twitter.
There's a couple of.
It's been a rough couple of years as a New York sports fan. Yeah, look, I wasn't even a big football fan until about high school. And my friends used to watch it. I didn't really even have a team. I think the Giants weren't even really that good. They had just brought this young guy on, and Eli Manning, and he had the last name, but nobody knew who he was. And so, yeah, growing up in Central Jersey, I think you're from somewhere close by there. I grew up in Plainsboro.
Yes,
and so
I grew up in Plainsboro.
You grew up in Plainsboro, yeah. We probably grew up down the street.
Princeton Junction, West Windsor, Plainsboro.
Yeah, exactly. That you're right off that exit, and so that 8A exit.
8A.
When you're on that that border between Eagles fans, Giants fans, Jets fans, so kind of just grew up around it. All my friends were into it. Where I really got into the game of football was I started doing press box announcing when I was in high school. So the guy who has been doing it for many years, he graduated, went to college. One of the teachers, I think, heard me speak, and he was like, "Hey, you've got the voice for this. Do you want to come do this?"
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely. Only one problem. I don't know the rules of the game." And he was like, "Okay." I mean, YouTube wasn't really a thing, right?
We can learn that.
He's like, just find some videos online and learn it. My first game was a disaster, but they thankfully didn't fire me. I think I said there was a quarter left when there was still a half left. It was a mess. I said the punt is good. It was very messy. I mean, this is going back 20 years, but I was like, yeah, listen, they didn't fire me after the first game, so I came back the second one. I got better, and over time, I did it for about 2 years, where I was a press box announcer for our high school team, and just through that, just fell in love with the game. When you're at the game every Friday and Saturday, and you become friends with the guys that are playing. Some of them went on to play in college. Just stayed sort of close to sports, and so yeah, when I came out of college, I didn't Carnegie Mellon doesn't really have a big athletic presence, but I did.
They're undefeated, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, I think there's a football team, and they consistently go 5-5, and so I think there was 20 or 30 straight seasons where they finished exactly 500, which is the pinnacle of mediocrity. But at the end of the day, what I really loved about just the sports industry is it is so much about community. And today, believe it or not, and we can talk about this, as I look at a lot of investments that are coming, from the consumer angle, all of them are trying to figure out how to build community. Right. And the great thing that just sports as a category has is the passionate fans that coalesce around communities almost organically. And so I've actually seen now, tying it to what I'm doing now, we haven't made a sports investment per se in a couple of years. But even when I look at these opportunities, the ones that tend to stand out really well are leveraging the fact that they already have a built-in passionate fan community. As passionate as me, who, sometimes thinks about doing some crazy things when the Giants are losing. But yeah, listen, I it's what I love about this industry. And so even as I have been at Launch Capital, and, we're sector agnostic, I have invested in a lot of categories outside of sports. The passionate fan community that's still there, I'm still excited about it. And so I still keep my ear to the ground on it.
And so I would assume, as obviously being part of the passionate community of Giants fans that you are, I ended up, West Windsor, Plainsboro, Princeton Junction. I ended up with the Eagles, the Philadelphia.
Oh man,
Eagles. That's what
I'm so sorry.
I guess in hindsight,
you guys have been doing better than us. So there's that.
That's true. And so you got your passion through high school. Obviously, as a press box announcer, that really gave you the opportunity to kind of get deeper in the weeds with sports.
Yeah.
It would be really cool, and we're gonna kind of ducktail this into what you're currently doing. But it'd be really cool to see some of those athletes like come on your show in the future. Maybe.
Yeah.
Or are they all too past their prime?
No, I don't know. I'd love to check in with some of them. I know there was a guy that got drafted, or I guess he signed with Michigan and he played for many years there. And but I don't think I think he might have been a free agent. I don't think he ever got there. But yeah, I'd love to sort of check in on some of my former players from my high school days and see what they're up to.
I think that it might be a little off the rails in terms of your theme, but it'd be a cool story to talk about and catch up with your
Absolutely.
buddies.
I'm still friends with some of them. Yeah, it'd be fun to catch up with them. You're right.
Did you know that there's even more value than just audio or video? Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at VC Hunting, and make sure to sign up for the VC Hunting newsletter, where you'll be able to get weekly news on venture capital, startups, founder stories, and the occasional wisdom extracted from Peter's brain. Go to vchunting.com to sign up. And now, back to the episode.
So let's jump into what you're doing today, and I'm going to preface this with another tweet from September 19th, 2016, or not a tweet. This is actually a blog post.
Oh yeah.
The titled "VC funds are the new steakhouses."
Yeah.
Interesting. VC funds are the new steakhouses. You said that athletes should find other investments than venture capital. And you were worried about the Me Too athletes getting into investing, mostly restaurants. And so being a sports fan that you are, obviously you're able as a commentator to be critical to the game,
Sure.
but also the post-game and maybe even their own investment lives. Why were you so critical to athletes and their investments? Was there like an emergent problem that you felt that you could solve?
Yeah, I think the one thing I'll say is my understanding of where athletes are actually investing and how they're doing has evolved quite a bit in the last couple of years. And so, I think in 2016, and also how athletes are investing has evolved quite a bit in the last couple of years. So we are going back a few years now. So about 4 years ago, really what I was seeing was there is a big, sort of slew of investors who have made hundreds of millions of dollars that are investing in venture capital, and they're investing at the earliest stages. And my real challenge was, look, if you're not actually going to do the diligence on these companies, if you're not actually going to be present as a board observer, you're not going to be active with them, why invest as a personal check? Why not just write a LP check? Just be an LP in Sequoia or be an LP in, Floodgate or whoever. What I realized over time is actually what they're doing makes sense, but the way they're doing it doesn't, right? The reason it makes sense is, look, if you feel like you have access to differentiated deal flow, then you should go ahead and invest. And you actually feel like you have an advantage that you're bringing by bringing a brand to some of these, these companies that you're working with. So, let's say you are Shaquille O'Neal and you have a really great brand and you've got a great presence and, you can hype up a new consumer app that you're excited about. Hey, yeah, you should share in the upside. You should have that. The challenge becomes how much of their capital they're investing, how involved they actually are, and what the founder can expect from this investor when they take their capital. Look, you see this as an angel investor. I see this as a VC. These companies take quite a bit of our time when we are working with them, when we are advising them, right? And that's just not an expectation you can have. I mean, retired athlete, maybe a little bit. Current athlete, I mean, no way, right? And I'm seeing this as we're trying to schedule folks for the podcast. I'm trying to get a couple of current athletes on. We're trying to work around like, hey, I'm playing in Milwaukee today and I'm playing in, San Antonio this day. And let's find if we can do it Wednesday at 4:30 when the moon is in the 7th house, right? It's really, really hard to get time with these athletes. And so what I started to see was that companies were starting to solicit athletes for venture capital without actually realizing that,
beyond the badge and the glitter and the persona, they don't really bring a whole lot to the table.
Well, what you should expect, what you should expect from your investor will change when they are an athlete versus when they are a traditional fund. And what I will say is like, my thinking from 2016 has evolved now because I have gotten to know some of these athlete investors. And I've realized that like many of them sort of set the table with that expectation, right? They go in there and they say, hey, look, I'm still playing. So if you want to catch me during the regular season, like one, here's how we schedule some time. 2, here is the extent of what I can provide you. So I'm not going to get on Instagram and Twitter and hype your product every day. But what I can do is I can intro you to somebody who can help you with distribution. Or if you're looking to make a critical hire, here, I've got a network of people that I know and I've worked with. And so, like I think Kelvin Beacham, who is, a really active angel investor here in New York, and he plays for the New York Jets. He and I think we met at a Christmas party like 3 years ago and really sort of had it out as we were having this conversation. And he challenged some of my thinking on it, where he was like, Jay, why shouldn't I do this? Why should I hand my money off to somebody else? I'm actually really excited about the companies that I want to be involved in, and I set my expectations with them. And so, I've written a follow-up to that piece called Venture Moneyball a few years ago.
Yes.
And in Venture Moneyball, as I was talking about, it was, athletes actually have quite a lot of value that they're bringing to these companies. And then, another follow-up that I've done on it recently is I'm seeing not just athletes, but celebrities get involved in investing in early stage companies. The value that they are bringing is in distribution. The value that they're bringing is in awareness of brand. Just maybe don't expect them to, dig in with you on certain things around operations or certain things around hiring.
They're not going to sit down with you and go over strategy, right?
Yeah, it's some of them might, right? Some of them might understand your go-to-market strategy, but you wouldn't necessarily expect them to break down a P&L with you. Some can, but most won't, right? And so understand what you're getting from them when you're working with them.
I would say from reading a lot of your blog posts, I would say that the investor mindset of the athlete investor is what I'm writing down, what I'm calling the athlete investor has certainly matured. This is still, I think, in terms of the public square, I think it's still a relatively new phenomenon. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but we've seen a couple of stars come out. Reaching from my back pocket here, the last one I remember is Floyd Mayweather, like promoting like a cryptocurrency or something like that. Probably not a great example.
Maybe not a great example. But Kevin Durant is a good example, right? Kevin Durant has been really actively involved in quite a lot of Series B, Series C, and Series D investments. Maybe less a little bit on sort of the very, very early stage. But as these companies start to hit an inflection point, Kevin and his team get involved. And he's actually quite excited. I mean, you can go on Twitter and read, when Kevin sort of writes about these companies that he's working with, they're invested in Overtime. And, he was on Overtime shouting out college or high school athletes that were, featured on Overtime. And that starts to create a loop, right? He is now getting these college players and high school players excited about Overtime. Other folks that are watching this video are like, wait, I got to get my dunks on Overtime. Kevin Durant might comment on them. Right. And now suddenly his presence, his engagement makes the value of that platform grow. And so, I mean, that's probably a good example, maybe a little bit more than Floyd Mayweather and his cryptocurrency.
Well, we also know that the late Kobe Bryant was a big investor as well. And so usually when it comes to athlete investors, you hear more athletes going into like music or media, or rapping or movies or restaurants, failed restaurants usually. And we generally hear about these athletes losing it all. And so what is it about to you? And I'd love your opinion on this idea. What is it about athlete investors that moves them towards investing? Because that seems to be, in terms of the public square, a relatively new idea. And so where does the maturity come from? Where are these ideas come from that we're seeing now more, not huge amount, but we're seeing more athlete investors get into this game? What was the inflection point? What changed?
I think there are two things primarily that changed. And one maybe that has stayed the same, but the asset class has changed, right? So the first being the goal for these athletes post-playing career. Look, most of them, and we can talk about this with the podcast a little bit, but most of them maybe don't realize that by the time they turn 30, they'll have made 80% of their lifetime income, many of them, right? And now you've got to live off of that capital for however many years. And so the goal for a lot of these athletes is to create a, great level of hopefully generational wealth, but at least comfort for their family and their loved ones and people they have to take care of, right? So the goal hasn't changed. The asset class that they are pursuing has. And so it's gone from, as we talked about, right, steakhouses, which is what they used to do in the 90s. And that's sort of what the impetus behind that article was, right? That like most of these athletes were finding financial challenges with steakhouses, and they're finding it now.
Or sushi bars.
Capital fund, or sushi bars, or, whatever else, right? Casinos and things like that. Now what they're starting to realize is like those investments used to be local. Right, because they were investments. You buy a car dealership, like, from our neck of the woods, Brad Benson Hyundai was everywhere, right? And he was the classic Giants player that started a car dealership that became a mogul, right? And so, like, that was a local investment that he made because that is the only thing that was accessible to him in his sphere. So the second thing that has changed is the advent of mobile and sort of, social internet, right? So now you don't just have to invest in whatever is in, local to you in New Jersey.
Right.
You can invest in anything all over the world. You can invest in cryptocurrencies. You can get active on the public market side if that's something that's interesting to you, because Robinhood allows you to, trade from your phone or whatever it is.
Exactly.
And so I think that's the second biggest thing that's changed, is why we are seeing an inflection point in athletes getting active as investors beyond sort of their local community, because athletes have been investing in their local communities for many years, right?
Yes.
Now they're doing the same thing. They are just trying to build that same generational wealth on a much larger stage. And because it's on a much larger stage, we are now just starting to read about it and hear about it. Because look, if they were launching a gym or they were launching a car dealership, TechCrunch is not going to write about it, right?
No.
But now when, the late Kobe gets involved in, Lyft or one of these great tech companies, everybody wants to write about it. They want to have him on panels. There's a ton of now conferences. Almost every single one of them, look at any major tech conference, there will be a panel on celebrities or athletes investing. And it's just become a part of the zeitgeist now.
I really have noticed that. I think it was 2 years ago that I was at a VC conference and there was a panel of celebrities, and I'm not a big movie person, so I didn't really know any of them, but I was just like, this is a real, when did they flip the switch? When did the celebrities infiltrate venture capital? But I guess it's happening. And so I would assume, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I would assume that we would start seeing venture funds that have a thesis that is really directed towards this type of marketplace. Is that fair?
You're starting to see that a little bit. There are a few funds that I know of, many of them based in LA, actually. Just happens to be where they are. Right?
That's where all the actors are.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, and Nikki Quinn at Lightspeed Ventures has become really active with helping incubate some of these companies like, Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop. And I think she's working with Brady and Giselle on something. There's, Plus, I think it's called Plus Capital out in LA that's working with these, investors. Well, my old boss from my, Mesa days started a company called Patrikoff & Co., Mark Patrikoff, where he's working with some athletes. So there are funds that are starting to, coalesce around this. And the question really becomes, what is it that the athlete actually needs? Is it access? Is it a level of diligence that they just can't provide? Or, maybe is it something else? And so, look, part of, what I'm excited about doing sort of over the next couple of years is actually exploring that through the conversations that I'm having with these athletes, is to say, when they come on the show, when we chat with them, hey, what is it that you need your post-career? Like what first of all, what is that like when, there's just a day where you retire from the game that you played for how many years in your life, and now the next phase of your life starts. So what do you need there to feel fulfilled? And then the next thing is, if you become an investor, or if you want to get active in, the tech and startup world, what is it that you as an individual and you as sort of a team around you need to make that successful? So we're seeing funds that I think are poking around this idea because, look, I think they've seen what I've seen, right? And if you're willing to spend some time looking into this, what you'll realize is the biggest problem that consumer companies have today is cost of customer acquisition. It is skyrocketing.
Absolutely.
And so if you bring in a celebrity or an athlete, and you're able to really align them with the investment that they're making, so it's not just sort of a flyer. I mean, they really care about what they're working on. You can get a lot of organic reach from that relationship. And so we're going to start to see, I think, in the next decade, athletes go from just being investors and partners to be co-founders and founders of some really, really great companies. And so, that's great for me because more guests for me on the podcast. For sure.
And I don't want to, I don't want to create any memeable moments here, but could we see a Jay Kapoor venture fund that's focused on athletes in the future, or am I saying too much?
No, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, leaving all doors open. Right now, I'm, sort of happy working with the folks I'm working with.
Awesome. So let's get into what you're doing today. And we're going to introduce this topic with Tim Katt, who is your co-host on this new podcast called The Game Plan, where you interview pro athletes and their business ventures. So give us a little bit of context. How did you meet Tim Katt? And tell us about this new podcast that you're running.
Yeah, so Tim Cott and I have known each other, I'd say probably 5 years. Back when I was still in my NFL days, I think we connected at a conference, and he had sort of been, I think he had worked for the Detroit Lions for a little while, then moved around in the sports world, working at RGA on the agency side for a little bit, working with some major leagues. And he and I just, became industry colleagues, industry friends, right? We would sort of check in every few months, get lunch, get dinner, to see how things are going and help each other out. And really the idea came about, I'd say a year ago at this point, and we sort of like ruminated on it for 6 months. So about a year ago, I'm at a conference and I'm chatting with Marcus Colston, who played for the Saints for many years and among some other teams. And I think I'd seen him on Bloomberg or ESPN or wherever it was. And I said, hey, you've been retired for 5 years. You have been doing some really interesting things. Some of them have worked, some of them have not. But when you go on ESPN or you go on any of these places, all they want to do is ask you, hey, what do you think about the Saints playoff chances? And it's like, man, I've been living another life for 5 years. Like, nobody wants to talk about that. And so I asked him, I said, where do you go to have those conversations? And, I think the answers he gave me were he was like, yeah, there's a few places, not really. Mostly it's panels, mostly it's conferences. He was moderating a panel at that conference. And so I said, okay, well, there's something here. And so it was kind of kicking around in my head for a little bit. And I actually know the exact moment that I realized I wanted to actually actualize it. And I had chatted with Tim. I think we had grabbed brunch and I sort of pitched him the idea. And I said, look, I don't want to do this alone. And we've known each other for many years. I sort of trust your judgment. And I think, we would be good to work on this together. But again, it was still sort of like kicking around in my head. I ended up in San Francisco. I was just there for some meetings, connected with an investor at Floodgate named Arjun Chopra. And he gave me some phenomenal advice where he said, Jay, so, I was sort of asking career advice. Hey, how do I get from where I am to where you are? Right. Sort of standard kind of stuff. And I said, this is kind of the deals I'm working on, and sort of they're pretty sector agnostic. And I'm trying to figure out what I'm really excited about and what I want to work in. And he was like, Jay, the only thing we are all looking for in this life is an unfair advantage. He said, go figure out what is your unfair advantage, and everything else will take care of itself. And I was like, and we spent an hour together, but like this rattled around my head for a while. And I said, look, every VC is here writing blog posts, doing tweets, sort of building what they're building. My unique advantage is that I have spent 5 years in a career outside of tech and venture where I have, a good name and some great relationships that I can sort of leverage to tell stories. So on one hand, I have these stories that I really want to tell, right? Like that conversation I had with Marcus Colston, where I was like, I want to hear about what you've been doing in the last 5 years, not what you did in the 10 prior. Right. And then tying it back to what is my unique advantage? Well, unlike most people, I actually have access to these individuals. And so let's bring those two things together. And the podcast became, I think, a natural medium for it. I believe, just coming from the media world, you realize that like your medium has to reflect the message. And so what I mean by that is audio is inherently a very, I think emotionally close medium, right? You're in somebody's ear, you're in their head, they're listening to you as they go about their life. Video is, I think, a lot more performative. Written is a lot more sort of in-depth and researched, but audio has a closeness to it. And if the whole point of this is bringing light to these stories for these great athletes that are doing some incredible things off the field, then we have to do it in a medium that reflects the message. And that's where the podcast came about. So that was what really excited me about it. Tim and I, basically since the Labor Day weekend, I think around that fall, kicked off with reaching out to some folks in our network. Initially just started with touching base with the athletes that we had helped, throughout our career, both as investors, get a lot of inbound from athletes and said, hey, let's, spend some time on your business plan, or let's work on your go-to-market. Reached back out to those folks and said, hey, let's have you on the show and have you tell those stories. And so we've got some of those folks that have come on that are athletes turned entrepreneurs. We're going to have a few athletes turned investors coming up in the next few weeks. Awesome. We've, at the time of this recording, released a couple of episodes, but we've got quite a few more recorded and in the can and ready to go. So I'm really excited. I think, this is a look behind the curtain at the thought process of two early stage investors. And it's also a look at what some of these athletes that you haven't thought about since they retired are doing now. I mentioned to a friend of mine, I was like, hey, this is somebody we're going to have on the show. He was like, oh my God, that guy won me my fantasy football league 5 years ago. What's he up to? And I was like, well, tune in next week and you'll find out what he's up to. So that's what the game plan is all about.
That's awesome. I had a question here. Like when it comes to, because athletes, I don't probably need to say this, but athletes clearly don't generally come from an investing background or a venture background or a startup background. They're in their industry because they have prowess and they have skills and abilities to move balls around. I know I'm cheapening it.
Sure.
But what in your estimation, since you've been steeped in this and you've been able to talk with these guys and pick their brains, what do you think is the advantage, maybe even the unfair advantage that athletes have when they move into investing as a primary focus, not just, hey, here's my name, here's some money, here's a check, but for your athlete investors, your athlete, entrepreneurs of sorts, what unfair advantage do you think they have?
I think it's a little bit different for the entrepreneurs versus the investors.
Okay.
I think for the entrepreneurs, we tend to see this from the conversations that we've been having, but even from the guys that I've gotten to know over, my years in the industry, doors open up for them. People want to meet them. People want to get to know them. And as long as they do a good job sort of vetting whether this person is actually interested in taking a meeting because of the company versus taking a meeting because they want to, yeah, exactly, right? You have to do your own diligence on that end. But two competing companies, one that has an athlete co-founder, that's the one that's going to break through the inbox versus the other one that doesn't. And now that doesn't mean go and just find any athlete, right? As I said at the sort of earlier in our conversation, finding somebody that really aligns with your brand and something that they really care about and aligns with what you're building is super important. Because
but if I bring OJ Simpson onto my board, it's not going to look good for me.
I think you might get a temporary boost, but it's not going to last for a while. And I'll leave it at that with OJ. So I think that's sort of where it becomes a little bit of a challenge, where people think that just by grabbing any old name, right? We in this, I think, social sort of culture have a really good BS meter. We have a really good nose for authenticity. And especially in this era of influencers, we're starting to realize that the ones that actually break through and succeed are the ones that have a personal connection to this brand. And unfortunately, try as you might, no one's really figured out a good way to just manufacture that, right? People have a really good BS meter. And so they have to want to talk about what they're building. They have to want to talk about it. And as a result, really what we see is the athlete entrepreneurs that find a passion that they care about. Let's say it is, helping, the youth sports market get better at health and safety or mental wellness or learning their playbook. They're really, plugged into that. They're going to care about the product, right? And that frees up you or whoever it is as a CEO to go focus on the things that you need to focus on, because you've got a partner that actually cares about your business. Now, on the flip side, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that it makes a ton of sense that you would find an influencer, let's just call it that, an influencer that really actually has their teeth sunk into that idea or that market or that thing that you're doing. So that way they can actually speak intelligently about it. My brain moved to Britney Spears and Pepsi. My BS meter was going this was like a decade ago, but my BS meter was going all off because I was like, she doesn't care about Pepsi.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between, having somebody as a founder versus a sponsor. But you touched on something really interesting there, which is when you look at athlete investors, the best sort of value they bring is they have their finger on the pulse of culture. And the reason is because they make culture. Whether it's a celebrity or it's an athlete, they are the culture makers. And so as a result, when you are a consumer investor, which again, we invest across both consumer and B2B, but when you're looking at a consumer opportunity and you see a athlete or a celebrity writ large, they are a tastemaker. And so when they lean into something and they say, hey, let's say StockX, which was a couple of years ago, was just very nascent, but it was a marketplace for shoes and just sneakers and sneaker culture. And you looked at how many celebrities and athletes got around something like that. As you start to see that coalescence, it sort of triggers in your head, hey, maybe we got to take a look at this thing, because the culture makers, the taste makers, they're telling me this is going to be a big thing.
It's funny you say that because I got into StockX because I heard news, or it might have been on TechCrunch or Vox
Yeah.
or something, where I was reading about these athletes going to a shoe stock market. That was all that I needed to read. I was like,
Yep.
wait, what? A
Yep.
shoe stock market? And lo and behold, it's a huge industry now. Or
Yeah.
maybe it's a
Yeah.
burgeoning industry. Let me put it that way.
And it's growing across other categories. It started with shoes, and now it's going to all these different kinds of collectible items. It's going towards paintings. You can buy fractional shares of
Yeah.
vintage cars, right? So you're starting to see that these tastemakers were early to a trend. And if you are a VC investor, you have to be both early and right, but being early is half the battle. And
Yes.
so your ability to get in at a price that makes sense for a fund, like we're a small fund, right? Like we're not competing for some of these mega deals. So our advantage is that we have to find the founders early and work with them and support them so they get to a stage where it makes sense for a larger fund to come in and co-invest with us.
That's awesome. Well, tell us, we're coming close to the end here. I want to be cognizant of our time.
Yeah.
And I want to ask this. I got 2 questions left. This first question is, what are some of the guests and experiences that you've had so far doing this podcast that really, really just kind of lit you up and excited you? And secondly, can you give us a hint? What are some of the guests coming on? We kind of want to know. Let's give them a little bit of a taste, I suppose.
Yeah, sure. So, as we started this show, one of the first things I wanted to do was make sure that we had a great season 1. And so, we have released 2 of those episodes. We've got, I think, 15 to 16 is where we're going to end up on season 1. And we've got a breadth of guests coming from, primarily initially the NFL, because that's just the world that I come from. So it's folks that I can reach out to
You'll branch
easily.
out eventually.
Yeah, and we've already got folks from the MLS that I've recorded. We are talking to some U.S. Olympians that are going to come on, which, if you think about the experience of a U.S. Olympian, the big difference between that and the big 4 sports is that the money is quite a bit less when you're coming from, the Olympics. And
Right.
so learning about, like, they're playing for the love of the game. And
For
so it's
sure.
really, really interesting to see somebody who is going through a very similar transition at, let's say, 28 or 30 as an Olympian now, a retired athlete, but they don't have the financial cushion that somebody who played in the NBA for that same amount of time does. So that was a really interesting story, and we're going to uncover some more of the challenges as coming from that life. We're looking at, I think, a wide breadth of what sports means, right? Like I have, the beautiful thing is, like, we launched a couple of weeks ago, and we've already gotten some great inbounds from, folks in the CrossFit world, and somebody from WWE reached out and they said, "Hey, look, technically we're a sport." And I said, "Yeah, technically you are. Maybe we will, have you on the show and talk about it." It's really about the feats of athleticism. It's honestly, it's not even just about athletics, Peter. It's about people in moments of transition. And that's really what the show is about, because that's, to me, just a really interesting and exciting point in somebody's life to discover. And as I'm sure you've been through it, I've been through it, switching jobs, having, things in family that happen. We as human beings find ourselves in moments of transition that are challenging. And I think hearing people who are, these gods that we see on TV and become part of our sort of, this mega culture, hearing them talk about some of their weaker moments, hearing them talk about some of the challenges, the
Makes
moments of
them
transition they had, not only makes them human, but makes it a little bit easier for us to carry the burdens that we have. And so if there's a story that we're telling with the game plan, it's that these are larger than life characters, but they're just people.
I love it.
And they go through the same things that we go through. So that's the story that we're hoping to tell.
I think if I can add any critique, I think that is probably the most succinct way of communicating the context of your podcast. Is that, yes, these are gods among men, but man, they're people in moments of transition like all of us. And those stories, the juicy bits of those stories, are always worth hearing, because at the end of the day, they end up having to do the same thing that as normies, us regular people have to do too. Make tough decisions, make tough relational decisions, these types of things. And so, there's so many juicy bits in it. And I think you've absolutely chosen the right medium, which is podcast right into your dome, so I can focus and listen to the kind of the emotion of the storytelling.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
And we've been really able to, I think the biggest thing that surprised me is just how open and honest our guests have been with us. Because, to them, this is their experience. They want to share it unfiltered. And we and and Tim and I are just a conduit for that story. And
I
so the
love it.
one thing that we do at the end of every episode is that we do we call our partner meeting. We do a recap of the takeaways from the episode that we just heard. And then, if it's an entrepreneur that's on the show, we'll talk about their business and say, here are some of the challenges that we see them facing in the future. And,
That's awesome.
maybe some ideas on how they would address it. So at the end of every episode, stick around. You'll get a little bit of the investor perspective as well.
I did enjoy. I listened to the first one. I didn't listen to the second one just yet. I will tell you that I do have an in with Tanya Harding. So
oh, wow. That would be a hell of an episode.
Let's just say I have a relative who has a friend who is a close friend of hers. And
yeah,
I got the opportunity to meet her up in New York one time. It was really intriguing because all I wanted to ask her is, why you bashing me? But I know that's bad. But here we go. Here's our final question. And this comes from Twitter. On May 19th, 2013, you had a really intriguing quote. And this is how we're going to finish off this interview today. May 19th, 2013, you said, pain heals, chicks dig scars, glory lasts forever. Unpack that for us for a second.
Yeah, that is a quote from the movie The Replacements with Keanu Reeves. And I think I might have been sick at the time and I was just binging some old sports movies. And that one came up. So, man, you're really digging into the time capsule here. It's a phenomenal movie. If you haven't seen it, it's a movie about a lot of the stuff that we talked about here, about sports, about perseverance, and about, just some good comedy.
Awesome. Well, maybe next time that we have you on, and I'd love to have you on, I think it'd be great to do like a mid-year update of what have you learned and what are some of the guests you've had. And maybe you'll be able to tell us what glory that you've had and what type of scars, because apparently chicks dig them. Jay Kapoor, thanks so much for joining the show. I'm going to give you the last word. Where can we learn more about you and your new podcast? Let us know.
Yeah, well, if you'd like to dig into my tweets like Peter has, you can find me on Twitter at @JKapoor NYC. That's @JKapoor New York City. And then if you want to check out the show, it's the Game Plan Show and we're on Instagram as well. We drop some bonus content, some clips on there on Instagram, so you can find us at Game Plan Show. And then we're available on every major podcasting platform. So find us on Apple, Spotify, or if you just want to find all the platforms, you can just go to thegameplan.show and we'll have all the links there for you to find. But we're excited for you to check it out. And please find me on Twitter and, send me your thoughts because we're early on and feedback always helps.
I love it. By the way, back, I think I don't have my notes on this, but I believe back in 2012, you actually tried to get the @JKapoor. I think you tweeted at him. You said, "Hey man, how much were you willing to pay to take for this handle?" If I remember correctly, you did.
Yeah, you're right. That guy never got. And you know what? I think everything happens for a reason because I've stayed in New York the rest of my career, and so I think that handle has served me quite well.
Perfect. Well, again, Jay Kapoor, thanks so much for joining the show. I look forward to talking with you again.
Thanks, Peter. Take care.
True startup story time. Guys, as a founder, I'm often asked, what are my go-to tools and technology that I use as I begin a startup? Well, that's easy. One of them is Dropbox. Dropbox is the easiest way to ensure that all your files and documents are synced on all devices, whether it be mobile, your local desktop, or remote. We want to thank Dropbox for supporting vchunting.com and make sure to get your 30-day trial free at dropbox.com/business. Wow, that was a fun conversation with Jay Kapoor, who is the principal at Launch Capital, but the host of The Game Plan, a new podcast talking about athletes, investing, entrepreneurship, and all of those types of stories. What I really liked is the last thing he said, if you guys caught it, is that really what the Game Plan podcast is about is people in moments of transition, right? We have athletes, these gods among men, that at the end of the day have to make decisions just like you and I. And these types of stories are always intriguing. And I hope that the stories that I bring into you guys in video format are just as intriguing. But I really appreciate the fact that Jay said that the message has to fit the medium, in that the medium has to reflect that message, and they chose podcasting as a mechanism for these types of stories, and I think it makes a lot of sense. I would say though, if and I didn't bring it up, but I would say that in a mobile first, video first world, I wonder, would Jay and the podcast or the show experience, would it be diminished if we were able to see them in person, in video? I might be on the other side of this wall here. I believe that video is king, so I'm gonna stick there. But I'm really excited that he's doing this. I've never heard of a podcast like this, and so getting these types of stories, it's gonna be, well, I'm a subscriber. Let's just put it that way. I really appreciated his story. One of the things that I wanted to get into is his immigrant history. If we go back to December 1st, 2018, he wrote a really just beautiful blog entry titled "Remembering Payal Kapoor," his mom, who recently passed. And he talked about her story, her journey of being an awesome mom, a supportive mom, being an immigrant mom, and all the struggles that go along with that. And I really appreciated his candor and his transparency in talking about that. And it shows me in many ways, and I was prepared for this, but it showed me that his willingness to be transparent, to be candid about his feelings, about what's going on. And as expected, he was really transparent and candid about what he's doing with the podcast. And I really appreciate that. That is one of those things that it's hard to find. It's hard to find people who are willing to write and discuss tough life transitions. So it makes a lot of sense. I hope you gleaned a lot of great information from this interview with Jay Kapoor. I mean, he's a New Jerseyan like me. What can I say? I wasn't born there, but he was raised in Jersey just like me. So, West Windsor, Plainsboro, Princeton Junction, guys. Exit 8A. That's where we're coming from here. I really appreciated the fact that he talked about this whole idea, this burgeoning market of athlete investors. Now, I've seen this in the past. Now, I'm not deep in the VC venture capital conference world, but I've been to a couple. And what is really interesting is that there is a burgeoning market for these individuals, for these athletes who are in transition, retiring and trying to figure out the next phase of life. And investing, entrepreneurship, companies, man, it's an exciting place to be. And so I really do wonder, and I'm going to leave this as the last idea on this retrospective here. I really do wonder if we're going to end up seeing Jay Kapoor in the future with his own venture capital fund focused solely on all of these individuals, right? Because he's going to be creating a backlog of all these athletes that he's going to be meeting. It would make sense that with all that leverage, that in the future, he might be in a really great spot to service these athletes in the future. Am I going to call it? Jay Kapoor, the Game Plan Venture Capital Fund? Maybe. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this conversation just as much as I did. It was great, and I look forward to listening to his podcast, and I look forward to the progress of Jay Kapoor and the Game Plan podcast, guys. If you want more information and the field notes of our interview, make sure that you find your way over to vchunting.com/Jay Kapoor. Guys, it's great to be in a position where I, like Jay, are interviewing really fun venture capitalists. Unlike him, he's already a venture capitalist. I am not, and so I'm still on my journey to be one. I'm glad that you guys are here. Stick around. We have even more great interviews coming up every weekend. Thanks, and we'll see you guys next time.